Hi, welcome to my talk, Enhancing Custom IDEs with AI. This talk is going to be on a strategic level, and it's going to discuss use cases and especially pitfalls and some advice on how to implement that. My name is Maximilian. I'm working for Eclipse Source, and I've been working with AI now for almost 2 years, and I've been mainly integrating that into custom IDEs and tools, and this is a little bit of the experience that we picked up during that time. What is it really that AI can do in my IDE or tool today? And when I say AI, I specifically address LLMs, so the latest developments of AI. And I would like to just, as an introduction, briefly show you how that can look like in a tool. What I have here is Eclipse Theia, and in the latest version of the Eclipse Theia IDE, there is an AI feature integrated, for example, in the terminal that I have here. And if I press Ctrl-I, I can, instead of entering a command myself, I can ask the AI to help me with finding a command. So for example, I could say find all shell scripts that run any git command. Believe me, I have no clue how to do that. I would have to Google that. And I get a command that looks reasonable. It does something with grep, that's what I would expect, and it searches for .sh files. Seems good to me. If I hit enter, I can automatically take over that command, and if I hit end again, I execute, and I can tell you, because I know that repository, this is actually the shell script in that repository that does actually run a git command. What else? So what can you do with AI in your tool and IDE? I just want to motivate by giving you some ideas of use cases that you could add to your IDE or tool. So a welcome bot, that's something that's a low-hanging fruit often. That's a chat-like interface that helps new users and beginners to know what your tool is about, what you can do there. And it can do more than just letting the people know by chat. It can help people. So you can, for example, ask, what can I do? And it could propose you can generate an example project. And then when the user confirms to generate an example project, it'll just execute that command. So AI code completions, we all know that. You can improve on code completions by that. Code generation, obviously. You can ask to get code generated based on a user input. Test case generation, which is often an overlooked use case. Generating test cases works very well with those LLMs. Terminal support, like we've just seen. Or if you think about it, there could be other flavors of that. The AI could detect that you have an error message on your console and just help you with coming up with a resolution of that error message. Generate documentation based on code that you have. Understanding code, that's also often an overlooked use case. It can really help you to navigate stuff. You can ask questions about codes or other artifacts, right? If you have a tool, that's a modeling tool, you can also ask questions about your models. Summarizing artifacts, which is also cool. So you can summarize artifacts, again, code or models, or even changes on those artifacts. So coming up with a git commit message, for example. And many more. So that should give you an idea what you could potentially do. And before we start with any pitfalls or advice, I would like to motivate why I think it is so important that you start with exploring what AI could do for you now. And that is because, very unsurprisingly, AI is very disruptive. But there's actually already numbers on that, how disruptive that is. And I don't think it's the next new trend that comes up every 1 or 2 years. I think it's something that's really more in the level of something new in a decade. It's really disruptive. You can observe that there is very fast growth, both in usage, but also in investment of people to adopt AI. The overall adoption is already at 72%, says McKinsey. You have a large user base, depending on the industry, 35 to 75% of weekly users, according to the World Economic Forum. High investment, more than half of the organizations are investing plus 5% of their digital budget already now into AI, and they intend to increase that in the next 3 years. And it's very disruptive to jobs in general. So the prediction is that 23% of all jobs globally will change within the next 5 years. And of course that applies to processes also, and last but not least, the things that help you with the processes tools. So that's why we talk about that now. So I think there's really no time to waste. You will fall behind your competitors from my perspective if you don't look at those things now and how you can do something with them. And it's really time to get started now. I mean, we're already 2 years into the journey and it's very, very fast. So talking about fast, that gets me to the first point. You have to plan in AI years. What is an AI year? An AI year is a regular month. So what that's supposed to mean, things happen very, very fast. In fact, they happen so fast that what usually happens in 3 years in regular tech, which can already be something, but the regular tech development speed that we're all used to, that doesn't apply to AI. What happens in 3 years might arrive in 3 months. So the way that I think about it, if I'm thinking about, okay, I'm shipping that product or that particular feature better in 3 months, I'm thinking, okay, what would regularly happen in 3 years of technology development? Some things could happen during that time. So that's how you have to plan in advance, as far as you can. And what that also means is, usually it means you get better technology in those couple of months. And that changes everything. It opens more use cases for your application. So maybe the use cases you're working on now, or you started to work on 3 months from now, they're not the most important use cases anymore at the time. You will likely choose a different architecture or implementation. We will get to that point later. But with a better LLM or a better AI, you will implement stuff differently. You will have less effort for implementation, likely. You will have a lower cost of operation because these LLMs get better, but if you take the existing level of an LLM and you run it 3 months from now, it will be much cheaper to run. The inference will be much cheaper. Still, that almost sounds like, okay, let's just wait, and everything gets cheaper and better and faster. But still, there is some key reasons why it is important to start now, and that's knowledge and experience, because that does not develop that fast, right? These LLMs improve at a very fast pace, but for us humans, it's difficult to build up that knowledge and experience, and that takes time. So there's no time to waste to build up that knowledge and experience in your team. And data collection is another important point. It turns out that many of those AI features, if you put them to production or on actual users, they behave different than what you would have expected. So you have to collect data and feedback to see how they behave. And of course, in the end, time to market. You don't want to be the last one to have that feature that maybe is very disruptive to the type of tool that you have. So how do you get started? So there is a lot of truisms on that slide, but I'll promise you we will dig deeper on the different points so that they make more sense and are more pragmatic. So what you should start with is, in your specific domain tool, you find use cases with your team. You think about what are potential use cases. Maybe starting with the list, but typically your tool is different and it has different use cases. And then you briefly explore those use cases. I'll get to that in a minute, how we do that. And then you do rough estimations, because you'll come up with a lot of ideas what could potentially be done, but you somehow have to prioritize. And the prioritization that we at least like to do lately is with something like planning poker that you might know from agile processes. You determine an anchor use case, so that's a mid-size use case, and you just assign an arbitrary number for both the relative cost and the value. The relative cost is often something that can be determined by your development team in this planning poker process, where everyone comes up with a number and then you discuss what the best number is after revealing. The relative value often can be provided by the product manager that can maybe see how that would impact customers and what value it would provide. And then unsurprisingly, you calculate the cost-benefit ratio, right? And you pick those ones that have the best cost-benefit ratio. And from a practical experience, I can just tell you that is a great way to just get rid of a lot of use cases and say, oh, those are the top 5 ones. They have a really good cost-to-benefit ratio. And then you start building a POC for those end use cases that you pick. So digging deeper, how do you find and explore use cases? So Generally, I would be very opportunistic about that and very pragmatic. So what we do is we focus on the domain-specific part, not the AI infrastructure, because that's also something I've seen often. First of all, an AI team is created, and then an AI team, what does it do? It trains an LLM. It fine-tunes an LLM for some use case that might potentially work after 7 months of training. But in 7 months, that's 7 years of tech development, everything has changed. So you really have to be pragmatic in the sense that you pick something that can be developed fast and that can be delivered fast, where you can get fast feedback cycles. And therefore, what you do is you don't train an LLM and you don't make any complicated decision process about taking a particular LLM and the back and forth of which one you should take. You just pick the best available frontier model LLM without any further considerations of legal or whatever, because you pick it to try to solve your use cases purely with prompt engineering. So that means, very concretely, you go to the playground of your frontier model of choice, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, and on the playground, or even in the app, and you just buy the subscription, you try to solve your use cases with prompt engineering. That sounds super simple, but prompt engineering really is something you should learn. I would really advise that. That's a good tool, even for your daily work. That's more than just writing a paragraph of text that gets you the right results. That's also about thinking, how would you go about solving that problem? Maybe it's a multi-step prompt. The first step is maybe coming up with a plan. Second step is maybe making another prompt to the LLM to say, check that plan. Check it for the following inconsistencies that I know of that often happen. Third point is, please, for each step in the plan, make a more detailed plan that maybe calls out to tools. So prompt engineering can be much more, but all of that can be simulated in the playground, right? So you don't have to write a single line of code to figure out, does it seem feasible to get this use case to run? You can even get a feeling. Is it brittle? Will it break with a slightly different user input already? So that way you can get many use cases to run and get a good feeling of how complicated it'll be and what you need to get it to run. And then there are the more complicated steps that I would really recommend to postpone. Following that cost-benefit ratio, usually those don't show up at the top. One technique that often is discussed at least, and is often a way to solve some use cases, is to add RAG, retrieval augmented generation. I cannot go to the details in this talk, but the idea is, instead of having a static prompt where you just prompt the LLM basically always the same way, you inject dynamic information into the prompt that you usually gain by looking at the user input and then deriving relevant parts. Simple example, if you have a Q&A database, you go with a user query to that database and you pick pairs of answers that match the user query and you add that to the prompt. And that will guide the LLM to find better answers usually. But this is already usually roughly an order of magnitude of more work, right? You have to do the RAG, you have to calculate the embeddings, you have to have a process to keep them updated, and all of that. So you should usually only do that for a high-value use case that for a particular reason you want to have first. And then really refrain from doing fine-tuning. Yeah? That's for the very high-value use cases. If you start in this business, don't start with that. This will just put you back months of doing and figuring out stuff. And if you really are at the point where you say this very high use case needs to be done, only if all else fails. So what do you do short term? You build incrementally and you ship early, as you should usually do, but in this environment with the AI years in mind, it's even more important. And it's even more important because you need to gain this experience and knowledge in your team, so it's important to get something done. And it's important because of the collecting data, as I mentioned earlier. It would be great if in your AI integration you also collect some feedback. It can be just a thumbs up and down, but later on it will help you to search that database of interactions of users that did not go right and figure out why it did not go right. And you should, from the very beginning, automate testing. And testing is different for LLMs. If you think about it, what you get back from an LLM is non-deterministic. You cannot just have an assertion that asserts that it gives you back exactly that text. So you will likely involve another LLM call to judge whether the result contains certain things or conforms to certain assertions that you make. Having the LLM testing in place from the very beginning is important because you will iterate fast, you might even change the LLM, you will change your prompt, and with every change in the prompt, something could just topple over, and you need some test cases to figure that out. Long term, you also need to make some homeworks, so you need to think a little bit outside of the box. What does that mean long term for the workflows that I have? Are they maybe becoming superfluous, or are they replaced if there was even more AI in my tool? Does my tool focus shift because some work that used to be the core of my tool is now maybe automated in part? Is your tool still required? I mean, that could also happen. And what does it mean for your business model and your whole organization and processes? So now let's come to the technological core of those features, the LLM. I said earlier already that you just pick the best LLM for sketching, but I also think when you are starting to develop a feature, you should delay the final, and the emphasis is on final, LLM decisions. Because there is a lot of choice here. There's open and closed source and small and larger models, and you can host it off-prem or on-premises. There's regulatory requirements. Maybe you're not allowed to send medical data to someone who's hosting in the US. Data privacy concerns, obviously, you could do the inference on the edge or the cloud, but that depends on the size. And why I would delay that is the unknown technology trajectory. So we talked about the AI years. So at the point in time when you are ready to do something, maybe it's not so important anymore. You have an unknown user behavior, so only when you started doing that, you figure out part by part what users actually do. When you have an alpha version, for example, you don't know the use cases yet. So just deciding on an LLM at the worst case up front at the project, that doesn't seem to make any sense. What you should do, and of course, you don't know the cost. So if you make some LLM decisions based on cost, that changes rapidly. So what you should do is you should be prepared. You should think about where are we going to host that and what are the legal implications so that you have some ideas of what the decision criteria will be when you actually need to make the final decision. The other thing I would strongly advise also to delay is cost optimization. People go ahead and tweak their prompts or take a little bit of a smaller model because then inference becomes cheaper. But likely those cost optimizations are just sunk cost in the face of changes. You start this cost optimization project, and then 3 months down the road, the cost has just, I don't know, is a third of what it used to be. And really, if you look at that historically, for these LLMs, this is really Moore's law on steroids. Moore's law, if you remember, every 18 months, the computational power is supposed to double. If you historically look at an 18-month period of LLMs, which is 18 years of technological development, the cost for running exactly the same LLM comes down by 2 orders of magnitude, by 100-fold, 100+-fold. If you made any optimization, I mean, will it come down by 100 times by your optimization? No. So it can be completely superfluous what you did. The generated value might be much different what you think. So maybe cost is not even that important because users create a lot of value from that and are willing to pay for it. The user behavior obviously can be different, so maybe they don't use up as many API calls. The use cases change, the LLM behavior changes. If you get a new version of an LLM, maybe you can solve stuff just with prompt engineering without RAG. So all of that changes just too fast to do cost optimization prematurely. The core that you should work on, in my belief, is in the deep integration. So in the domain-specific part, because that's where the value generation really is. And an integration usually is not just adding an AI chat view and then just making calls to an AI. It's about integrating into the UI and to the workflow, like we've seen with the terminal, right? You integrate it into the terminal, and you can proactively offer support. So, for example, if an error was on a terminal, that would be a good example, and you detect that, you proactively show a button to get help for that. You aggregate the context automatically. I mean, you saw that I type in this find me all shell scripts and so on, but of course there's surrounding more information that is injected into the LLM. And at the extreme end, when you do an auto-completion, you don't provide any text. Everything is automatically aggregated in terms of what you send to the LLM. If at all possible, it would be great if you get executable results. Nothing is worse than just outputting some text of what you should do. Ideally, you can just make that executable, like we did in the terminal. And that's where really the value is created from my perspective, and it's also the value that we, as the tool smiths, can actually create. Trying to create any value in this whole realm of LLMs I think that's not the job that we should do. And there is just companies out there that do that very rapidly. So how does a typical iterative process for doing that look like? So you iteratively design and evaluate and productize feature by feature into your tool. And as we discussed earlier, you first start with identifying some use cases with your team where AI support could be added. And then you sketch that AI support with what we said earlier, mostly with prompt engineering. That's good anyway. That's a good learning opportunity for your team to find out how that works and to figure out good prompting strategies. Then you do this relative prioritization exercise to figure out, okay, what is the potential value that our users in the tool can gain from that AI feature, and what is, based on the sketching that I did, the likely implementation cost. And since it's relative, it doesn't matter that you get it down to the second digit number, it's just that you get it right in relation to the other use cases. It's a good filter to find the use cases that seem feasible now, right? And you do that iteratively. I mean, we get to the other points, but you do that iteratively because that might even change, right? Because some of the use cases, remember, with the new generation of an LLM, which maybe is out in 2 months from now, suddenly you can do them without RAG. And suddenly they come down in cost an order of a magnitude, and you say, okay, now this seems to be the most important use case for me. Then you work out the tool integration. This is something we haven't talked about so much so far, but this is really the part where the value generation from my perspective is. That's figuring out, okay, I tried on the playground that this kind of prompt would solve a problem. But how do I get all the information for that prompt? How can I fill in all or as much as possible of that prompt automatically? And then once I have run the LLM, how can I make sure that the result is something that's executable? That might require another call to another LLM, so that you get to a result where the user only needs to click a button or press a button so that the result is actually executed. A good example for a much more complicated tool integration is this planning template, I would almost say. I think that exists in some tools. So if you think that about a tool where you have a more complicated configuration process that maybe involves touching multiple files for achieving a certain task, if you would do a multi-prompt LLM solution for that, we say, tell the LLM in words what you would like to do, and then it comes up with a plan, and then it checks the plan, and then it implements the plan by generating a response for each of the steps. If you would do something like that, then the tool integration would likely also involve a UI that shows you the plan. So you would not just let the tool just give you a button back and execute the plan. Likely you would do it in a way where people say what they want to do. Then they get a plan back in a readable format, and then they can judge that plan. And if they like the plan, they can ask the LLM to implement the plan and then maybe even execute each step of the plan step by step. That's tool integration. And then you build a POC. So this now really involves, this is not only sketching on the playground, this now really involves getting it into the tool. And remember, if you build that POC, you want to have the testing in place, and you want to have in place the recording the user interactions, and if at all possible, collect some feedback. You demo that, you evaluate that, and then you estimate the effort for productizing. Often on the feedback rounds, you find out that maybe it's quite brittle. It worked, but only for 75% of the cases. So you need to put in some more effort to get it done. And you decide on the productization. And in practice, sometimes you just say, well, it turned out the POC showed us that it's just risky to do that. It's not worthwhile. Let's just iterate and continue our iteration with another feature. A word of advice on expectations. I think that's true for any tech project, but especially for these AI projects, very easy to create a first demo, especially if you know exactly the input, right? You know how to prompt the LLM that it'll provide the right result. But if you look at productizing that and if you roll that out to people, it shows that it's hard. People will make, there is hallucinations, which is one problem I forget to mention. So these LLMs will just make up stuff, especially when they don't find an answer. They are prone to making up stuff. And that's hard to fight, to find out that this is actually not factual, but a hallucination. There's non-determinism, which also makes it difficult. Sometimes that's good. It's also called temperature for those models. But it makes things harder to productize. And the open-ended user input. So you often find that users suddenly ask for different stuff than what you expected, and then it doesn't work well. And then you need to look at these interactions where it goes wrong. And if you think about a multi-step prompt, you can imagine that now it becomes more difficult and challenging to figure out why it went wrong and where it went wrong. So, in summary, what I think I try to motivate is that time is really ticking. It's good to start now. Because you want to onboard your team and gain and gather that knowledge. And you can start with the low-hanging fruits first. Those are the ones that come up high in this prioritization. You should focus on generating value that is domain-specific, so that is really in the tool integration, and not some abstract value that might come from a customized LLM that you develop. And then you start to iteratively build feature POCs, and you put them out as quickly as possible, ship early. If you would like to have some more information on that, there is a framework for AI integration in Theia. That is also the demo that I showed is based on Theia AI. And if you would like to know how to really do that, and not only on strategic level, I can recommend the talk of Philip, which is going to be on integrating AI with domain-specific tools, and it's tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. And it's going to be great, Philip, right? And then we have a BOF tonight, so I would be happy if you join us. This is about Theia, but also Theia AI. It's today at 7:30. And you can, of course, meet us at the booth at any time, or just drop me a message. With that, thank you very much. And if you like the talk, please take the survey. Any questions?
It's more of an observation, sorry. I was just trying to do a demo with AI, right? And you said like the open-ended user input, but that can also be a good thing because users can learn what to input.
So that it works.
So that it works, yes.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for the presentation. I have one question. You had a very lean approach, starting with just pick any model you like. And then you said the magic is in applying it into your domain-specific use case. At the same time, that usually is where your company's IP is in. So how do you prevent that IP from leaking out by using the model?
You mean if you would, so your question is basically if you use a third-party LLM and you integrate it into your tool, you leak your source code, for instance, or your model.
Yeah. For example.
Yeah. So I said delay, but do not just neglect that. So what you could typically do in this scenario is you take an open source LLM, like Meta Llama, for example, and you host it. And that's actually a very good example for why delaying is good. Let's say 7 months from now you evaluated that use case. And you figured out, and you would have used Llama, but it was not Llama 3.2. And it was not the 400 billion model. You might have concluded it does not work. But it would have worked at that time with ChatGPT 4.0. So by taking the most advanced frontier model, you basically forecast what's going to be around later on. And if you're now 7 months later, you see, okay, now I have to make the decision. I want to productize. But I have this constraint. We decided we cannot send that data out. We have to host on-premises. We have to do an open source LLM. And then you see, okay, here's Llama 3.2. Right? So that's why I delay this, or I advise to delay that, because it changes so rapidly that making that really the gate to go for a use case doesn't seem to be a good choice.
Thanks.
Any more questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much. I'll be at the conference, so feel free to just approach me. Thanks again.